After nearly 10 years of explaining Star Wars online, I've come across the same questions again and again. Today I'm posting a compilation video answering well over 100 of the most frequently asked questions I've seen about the original Star Wars trilogy.
Several transmissions were beamed to the ship by Rebel spies.
How did Darth Vader's Star Destroyer follow the Rebel blockade runner through hyperspace if hyperspace tracking hadn't been invented yet? The answer is found in the book From a Certain Point of View and the story Ramus by Gary Whitta, who was one of the writers of Rogue One. According to the story, the Tanta V4 was docked in Admiral Raddus's ship at the Battle of Scarif because its hyperdrive was in need of repairs. By the time they made their escape, the ship was barely able to make the jump to light speed. The malfunctioning hyperdrive motivator left behind what one officer on the blockade runner called an abnormal hyperspace wake. Captain Ramus Antilles compared it to a leaky oil pan, leaving behind a residual energy signature that was unique and traceable.
Hold your fire. There's no life forms.
Why didn't the Imperials shoot the escape pod containing R2-D2 and C-3PO? Gunnery Captain Bolvin ordered Lieutenant Hija to hold his fire because there were no life forms aboard. He made that order because, according to the book From a Certain Point of View, fleet bureaucrats had issued a new policy that tied gunnery officers' promotions to their kill ratios. That policy was created because of rebel propaganda that showed Imperials to be poor shots, so firing upon what Bolvin thought was an empty escape pod would have damaged his ratio, potentially hurting his chances at a promotion. What do Jawas look like under their hoods? We don't know for sure, but one person has given us first-hand details. Pelimoto called them furry.
Quite furry. Very furry.
That actually does line up with a description of Jawas given in the novelization for Star Wars by Alan Dean Foster. It described them as rodent-like and compared them to de-evolved humans. Visual dictionaries and other reference books since then have said they had remarkably ugly rodent-like faces.
All right, shut up. I'll take this.
Shutting up, sir.
Why didn't Uncle Owen recognize C-3PO when he purchased the droid from the Jawas? Didn't he own 3PO for several years before the Clone Wars? I can think of several answers for this. First, C-3PO doesn't introduce himself by name in the movie, he just confirms he is a protocol droid that can speak Bocce. And 3PO isn't a unique droid. That model was mass-produced and seen throughout the galaxy. Owen probably remembers owning a protocol droid in the past, but he has no reason to think he's about to buy the exact same one, especially because the last time he saw C-3PO, the droid wasn't covered in gold plating. Maybe he could have recognized 3PO's voice, but Owen is very dismissive of the droid, telling him to shut up. He just wants the transaction to be over so he can pass the droids off to Luke. Owen isn't actually listening to 3PO because he simply doesn't care. It makes complete sense to me that he would not recognize the droid.
Who is she? I'm afraid I'm not quite sure, sir.
Does C-3PO not know who Princess Leia is in A New Hope? When Luke asks who she is, he says, "I'm afraid I'm not quite sure. I think she was a passenger on our last voyage, a person of some importance, I believe." Shouldn't he know who Leia is after serving her family for nearly 2 decades? In reality, he does. According to an interview of George Lucas from 1977, which you can find in The Making of Star Wars, he says that C-3PO was specifically programmed not to mention having any knowledge of Princess Leia. He knew all about her, but was programmed not to say. So his supposed ignorance of her identity with Luke was simply programming to protect Leia.
That wizard's just a crazy old man.
Why does Uncle Owen hate Obi-Wan Kenobi so much? As Yoda tells Anakin in The Phantom Menace, the root of hate is fear. Owen Lars was simply afraid for his nephew. Just like Anakin was afraid of losing Padme, Owen was afraid Luke would wind up like his father, dead or worse. Now we can view Owen's fears as foreshadowing to the true identity of Darth Vader, but back when George Lucas was writing the film, the line from the third draft was, "That boy's going to get himself killed, he's just like his father." The Obi-Wan Kenobi series reinforces the idea that Owen believes Anakin died during the Clone Wars, and he blames Obi-Wan for that. We also see that he loves Luke as his own son, and is afraid any contact with Kenobi will lead to the same fate.
And if these new droids do work out, I want to transmit my application to the Academy this year.
Why does Luke want to go to the Imperial Academy? He seems pretty excited about 3PO's stories of the rebellion and tells Obi-Wan he hates the Empire, so why would he join their academy? At the start of the movie, Luke is far more apolitical. A deleted scene with Biggs Darklighter explores this further, but Luke's friend warns him that the Empire will eventually take more and more control of Tatooine. Luke is no fan of the galactic government, but he's stuck on a backwater planet with no future. He craves adventure and excitement and a chance to see the galaxy outside of his his moisture farm. The Imperial Academy may have been his only option to do so. That's exactly how Biggs got off Tatooine, and then he defected to the Rebellion. That was a path taken by many members of the Rebel Alliance, including Wedge Antilles and Sabine Wren.
I'm Luke Skywalker. I'm here to rescue you.
Why didn't Yoda, Obi-Wan, Owen Beru, or anyone think to change Luke's last name to better hide him from the Sith? There are a couple of reasons for that. At the time, it was thought that Darth Vader had died on Mustafar. Obi-Wan didn't know Anakin had survived until 10 years after their duel. It's unclear if the Emperor knew Padme was pregnant, and even if he did, her funeral was staged to make it appear that she was still with child. So the danger of anyone looking for the Skywalker twins was already low. In addition, stories like Thrawn Ascendancy Chaos Rising have stated that Skywalker was a somewhat common name in the galaxy. Obviously, we haven't encountered anyone else with that last name because that would be confusing to the audience, but I assume the name was common enough that the Lars family wouldn't want to change it. Not to mention, Owen and Beru may have wanted to honor Luke's relationship with Shmi, who was a beloved member of their family.
I'm getting too old for this sort of thing.
Why did Uncle Owen, Aunt Beru, and Obi-Wan Kenobi age so much in the 19 years between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope? Obviously, the real answer is that they were played by different actors, I know, but there is an in-universe answer as well. The novel Ahsoka by E.K. Johnston has an interlude about Obi-Wan which takes place only a year after he settled on Tatooine. He notes how much the desert climate had affected him in such a short amount of time. The fact of the matter is, sun damage will cause you to age, so think about living in a desert, and now think about living in a desert with 2 suns. It would almost certainly accelerate the aging process.
Hello there.
Why doesn't Obi-Wan Kenobi recognize R2-D2 in A New Hope? They shared so many adventures together. Well, Obi-Wan never says he has never met R2, he says he can't remember owning a droid. Alec Guinness's smirk while delivering that line can also be interpreted as a playful lie by omission. Obviously, none of that was intentional. I don't think George Lucas thought Obi-Wan and R2 knew one another back when he was making Star Wars, but a young reader adaptation of the movie called The Princess, the Scoundrel, and the Farm Boy includes a nice scene between the two characters that confirms Obi-Wan never forgot about R2. After Kenobi feels the destruction of Alderaan through the Force, R2-D2, quote, moved to Ben's side as if it were his faithful pet, an image that was further reinforced by the old man stroking a hand over its domed head. It's good to fly with you again, my old friend, the old man said, so softly Han wasn't sure he had heard him right. So Obi-Wan remembered R2-D2, he just decided to keep that knowledge from Luke.
Don't seem to remember ever owning a droid.
Wait, but hold on. Why did Obi-Wan say he can't remember owning a droid in A New Hope? Did he forget about R4P17? He flew with her throughout the entirety of the Clone Wars, from Attack of the Clones all the way until Revenge of the Sith, where she was destroyed. I would argue that Obi-Wan never owned R4. She was simply the droid that was assigned to him by the Jedi Council. I also think we have to remember that Obi-Wan never had the same kind of relationship that Anakin or Luke Skywalker developed with R2-D2. When R2 went missing in the Clone Wars episode Downfall of a Droid, Kenobi tells Anakin, well, R2 units are a dime a dozen. I'm sure you'll find a suitable replacement. So even though R4 faithfully served Obi-Wan for 3 years, it might be possible that he did let her memory fade away.
General Kenobi, years ago you served my father in the Clone Wars.
Why does Princess Leia address Obi-Wan so formally in her holographic message? Did she forget about their adventure together 9 years earlier? No, of course Leia didn't forget the very meaningful friendship they formed in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, but the message she was sending her old friend was part of a secret mission. Even though Leia's attempts to convince Darth Vader and the Empire she was on a diplomatic mission were obvious lies, I'm sure she would still be trying to do everything she could to protect her family. If that hologram were intercepted, it would have been terrible for her to say, hey Ben, remember 9 years ago when you rescued me and we were chased by Inquisitors and Darth Vader almost killed you? And remember how my family has known exactly where you were hiding for the past 19 years? Well, I need a favor now. No, that would have been terrible. It's far safer for Leia to act as if she and the Organas hadn't had any contact with Kenobi since the Clone Wars. Not that it did Alderaan any good in the end.
Vader, release him.
Why does Darth Vader take orders from Grand Moff Tarkin? There are several reasons for this. First, Vader isn't part of the Imperial Navy or military at this point. He doesn't receive command of the Imperial fleet until the time in between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back. At this point, he reports directly to the Emperor. But if his master orders him to go to the Death Star and do whatever Tarkin says, he will obey. The Death Star was under Tarkin's command, especially after the death of Orson Krennic at the Battle of Scarif. We see that Vader has some free reign, especially when he starts choking choking Admiral Mahdi without consequence, but he will ultimately follow Tarkin's instructions. We also know that Anakin Skywalker had respect for the Grand Moff back during the Clone Wars thanks to the rescue mission on Lola Sayu, and we know that mutual respect for one another only grew in stories like the novel Tarkin and the Darth Vader comic by Charles Soule.
You, my friend, are all that's left of their religion.
Did Grand Moff Tarkin know Darth Vader was Anakin Skywalker? Yes, or at the very least, he had a strong suspicion. The novel Tarkin says very early on in their partnership, soon after both had been introduced to the secret mobile battle station, Tarkin grew convinced that Vader knew him much better than he let on, and that behind the bulging lenses of his face mask, whatever remained of Vader's human eyes regarded him with clear recognition. More than anything else, it was those initial feelings that had provided Tarkin with his first suspicion as to Vader's identity. Later, observing the rapport the Dark Lord shared with the stormtroopers who supported him, and the technique he displayed in wielding his crimson lightsaber, Tarkin grew more and more convinced that his suspicions were right. Vader might very well be Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker, whom Tarkin had fought beside during the Clone Wars, and for whom he had developed a grudging appreciation. Did Boba Fett kill Owen and Beru? This is a fan theory that's popped up thanks to Darth Vader's command to the bounty hunter in The Empire Strikes Back: no disintegrations. Was he reprimanding Boba Fett for the disintegration of Owen and Beru? No, he wasn't. The book From a Certain Point of View has a story about the bounty hunter, and while he was involved in the search for C-3PO and R2-D2, he came across the bodies of Owen and Beru well after their deaths, so it's safe to say he wasn't responsible. The story also points out that he had previously disintegrated some rebels on Coruscant, and the Empire refused to pay him without their bodies as proof of death, so that's why Vader had to call him out in Episode 5.
We don't serve their kind here.
Why weren't droids allowed in the Mos Eisley Cantina in A New Hope? There are multiple answers to this question. First, and this was likely the answer back when the movie was made, is that droids aren't paying customers, so they would just be taking up space in the bar that could be occupied by an organic being that would order drinks. Second, despite the Clone Wars ending 19 years earlier, there were still heavy anti-droid sentiments in some parts of the galaxy. People weren't quick to forget the horrors inflicted on them by the Separatist droid army. And third, the bartender Wooher was especially against having droids in the bar. He had an encounter with battle droids in which they killed his parents during the Clone Wars. According to his story in the book From a Certain Point of View, he personally installed the droid detector in the doorway of the cantina. Why does Ponda Baba's arm bleed? Shouldn't the lightsaber cauterize the wound? This is absolutely a case of the rules about how lightsabers worked not being established until later movies. But to retroactively account for Ponda Baba's bloody wound, reference material stated that his species' blood did not cauterize by heat. It's as simple as that.
It's a ship that made the Kessel Run in less than 12 parsecs.
Han Solo boasts that the Millennium Falcon made the Kessel Run in less than 12 parsecs, but isn't a parsec a unit of distance, not time? Yes, that is correct. Interviews with George Lucas from all the way back in 1977, which you can read in the book The Making of Star Wars, show that Lucas was aware of that fact, and Han was boasting about how his ship was able to travel through hyperspace in the shortest amount of distance, not time. However, the script for the film also notes Obi-Wan's reaction to Solo's stupid attempt to impress him with obvious misinformation. Solo: A Star Wars Story and other reference materials have solidified Han's claims. Kind of. They have at least confirmed that Han was bragging about the distance in which he made the Kessel Run, but I personally always loved the idea that Han was just spouting out nonsense and Obi-Wan could see right through it.
Solo?
Who really shot first, Han or Greedo? A question for the ages since 1997. There's actually not one true answer for this. Obviously, the most recent editions, and by all accounts George Lucas's preferred editions, show Greedo shooting first. But stories that have come out since 1997, like the book From a Certain Point of View, tell conflicting stories. And I've come to believe that's kind of the point. If Star Wars is to be treated like a modern-day myth, we can pretend that these stories are being passed down through generations, as if they're being told around a campfire. Different storytellers will put their own spin on things, or in the case of From a Certain Point of View, different witnesses to the event will recall different details. So, who shot first? It depends on who's telling the story. What we know for sure is that Han and Greedo sat down together in a bar and only Han walked away, so just go with your own preferred version. I personally prefer Han killing Greedo before the bounty hunter could get a shot off. I think it makes his character arc more dramatic, but if you prefer Greedo shooting first, it's really not that big of a deal.
I recognized your foul stench when I was brought on board.
Why does Princess Leia have a British accent only when she's talking to Grand Moff Tarkin? Carrie Fisher has told the behind-the-scenes story about how she was simply nervous to be acting with Peter Cushing, and that anxiety manifested in mimicking his accent. But the book Bloodline by Claudia Gray gave us an in-universe answer as well. Leia meets another character who she notes had the same sort of aristocratic accent Grand Moff Tarkin had spoken in, the one so many senior Imperial officers affected, the one she had mocked when she and Tarkin last stood face to face. So the 19-year-old Leia Organa was simply mirroring the Grand Moff in an attempt to get under his skin.
Look, good against remotes is one thing. Good against the living, that's something else.
Why did Han Solo, of all people, have a Jedi training remote on the Millennium Falcon? A couple years before the events of A New Hope, Han and Chewie were hired by Jabba the Hutt to recover a mysterious urn. Several other parties were interested, including a man masquerading as Han's long-lost father, Owen. The man's true identity was Corbus Tyra, a notorious criminal and thief. After betraying Han, Corbus used a Marksman H training remote to attack the young smuggler and steal the urn. But Han eventually defeated Corbus, and the training remote became his property, likely gathering dust on the Falcon ever since. Why was there a Dianoga in the Death Star's trash compactor? It was placed there intentionally by the Empire, where it fed on any of the organic matter thrown into the garbage masher. That's why you would often see Dianogas in places like junkyards or sewers, for example the one we see on the planet Bracca in the Bad Batch, or the several seen on the planet Anowit in Dark Forces. Originally from the planet Vodran, the Dianoga from A New Hope was named Omi. The creatures were at least semi-sentient and able to feel and even listen to the Force. Omi's story in the book from a certain point of view tells us of her capture from her homeworld, relocation to the Death Star's trash compactor, and existence until the space station's destruction.
I think we took a wrong turn.
Why are there massive pits and bridges with no safety rails built within the Death Star? In truth, at the time of the making of A New Hope, it was just a design choice because George Lucas wanted a scene where the hero and the princess would swing across a massive chasm. But over 2 decades later, we learned that the Death Star was designed and partially constructed by Geonosians, a flying insect-like species. It's possible they used the pits to travel throughout the station during construction. They had no need for safety rails, and the Empire didn't care about the well-being of its personnel, so they were never added into the final design. This isn't an official answer by any means, but it's a fun one that works. How does gravity work on the Death Star? Is it straight down from the North Pole to the South? Or does gravity flip at the equator? Or maybe it's like a planet and all the levels are spherical? I think the easiest illustration of the answer is provided by LEGO Star Wars, and the movie too, but I think the LEGO Death Star set is accurate. I believe artificial gravity pulls everyone towards the South Pole of the station, at least on the inside. It's possible the outside has a completely different set of rules, with turbolasers oriented along the surface. But the true answer is that this is the kind of thing in Star Wars that doesn't really matter and is often ignored.
I've been waiting for you, Obi-Wan. We meet again at last.
Why is Obi-Wan's duel with Darth Vader in A New Hope so much slower than their fights in the prequels or the Obi-Wan Kenobi series? This is a question I get all the time. People are always looking for an in-universe reason for these two titans of the Force to have a relatively toned-down fight when compared to every other lightsaber duel. And we can make up reasons like Obi-Wan was simply older and Vader was toying with him, or Obi-Wan was buying time for Luke and the others to escape. I do think those are valid points, but the truth is, it was the very first lightsaber fight ever filmed. The props themselves were a work in progress. You can see cables running into Alec Guinness's sleeve because the hope was that they would be able to generate a glow during filming and not have to be done in post-production. There were a lot of unknowns behind the scenes that affected how lightsabers were presented in this movie. What happened to Obi-Wan Kenobi's lightsaber after his death? We don't currently know, but there are a few options. I personally think the most likely scenario is that it would have been left on the Death Star to explode. I don't think Darth Vader had any reason to keep the weapon in his pocket or something, especially when he hopped in a TIE fighter, but it's possible. In Star Wars Legends, Vader kept the hilt as a trophy at his castle on the planet Vajun, where it was eventually recovered by Han and Leia's son, Anakin Solo. So maybe the same could be true in canon. Maybe Vader did hold on to the lightsaber, or stick it in his TIE fighter, or pay for overnight shipping to Mustafar where the weapon of Obi-Wan Kenobi could still remain, waiting for someone to find it.
You're sure the homing beacon is secure aboard their ship?
Why did Leia go back to Yavin 4 if she knew the Millennium Falcon was being tracked? This is a question we have to speculate on, but I think the truth is that Leia didn't want to put any innocent lives in harm's way. She personally witnessed the Death Star firing on Scarif and of course Alderaan. She knows the Empire isn't afraid to use their planet killer, and it's likely that any planet they traveled to would be in danger of destruction. We also know the plans are too big to transmit without the use of a massive satellite dish like the one we saw on the Citadel on Scarif. I think luring the Death Star to a tempting target in the form of the Rebel base was the Alliance's best chance at destroying the superweapon. What is this Rebel sentry doing on Yavin 4? He is manually scanning any ships on approach to the hidden Rebel base. One of the benefits of setting up the secret base near Yavin was the fact that the gas giant created a lot of electromagnetic noise, which was able to hide Base 1 from any passive Imperial sensor scans. Basically, that meant it would be hard for the Empire to just stumble upon the base. They would have to make a purposeful scan of the planet to find it. The downside of that electromagnetic noise was that it meant the Rebellion's passive scans were also useless, so sentries were required to keep guard to inspect any incoming ships.
You're safe. When we heard about Alderaan, we feared the worst.
Where was Mon Mothma during the Death Star's attack on Yavin 4? The last time we saw her in Rogue One, she was at the Rebel base. The simple and confirmed answer is that she evacuated almost immediately after hearing that Princess Leia was on her way with the stolen Death Star plans. She didn't want to evacuate, but General Jan Dodonna insisted it was necessary. In the likely event their attack on the superweapon failed, she alone would be able to restart the rebellion against the Empire. So she was taken away from Yavin 4, and during the assault she considered several possible futures for the Alliance, and none of them were hopeful, but against all odds, the Death Star was destroyed and she rejoined the rebels shortly after.
That's impossible, even for a computer.
Who is this pilot in A New Hope? This is an interesting question because it has multiple answers. First and foremost, I would say this is Wedge Antilles. Dennis Lawson is most recognized as playing the character, but Colin Higgins played Wedge first. He struggled during his only day on set and was later replaced by Lawson. Then, both actors had their lines dubbed by David Ankrum, so that was absolutely meant to be Wedge Antilles, and some fans took to calling Higgins' version of the character Fake Wedge. When the book From a Certain Point of View came out, author Jason Fry wrote the short story Duty Roster from Fake Wedge's perspective, establishing him as a new and separate character named Cole Tackbright, who was actually called Fake Wedge by the other pilots, much to his displeasure. He was present for the Battle of Yavin, but was left on the ground due to a shortage of starfighters. So who is this character? Wedge Antilles is an acceptable answer, but Cole Tackbright is more fun.
The moon with the Rebel base will be in range in 30 minutes.
Why didn't the Death Star come out of hyperspace closer to Yavin 4? Because hyperspace doesn't work quite like that. You don't get to choose exactly where in a star system you come out of hyperspace. The safest way to travel at light speed is through the use of known and charted hyperspace lanes. Like Han explains earlier in the movie, precise calculations are needed to make sure a vessel doesn't fly through a star or run into some other interstellar object. So the Imperials took the Death Star as close as they safely could to Yavin 4. It's possible they could have then attempted a micro-jump, basically a very fast and short trip through hyperspace, but even that kind of travel could send a ship across thousands of kilometers. It's possible micro-jumping something as big as the Death Star would have been even more difficult. Grand Moff Tarkin probably thought it was just as easy to wait the 30 minutes to orbit Yavin. Okay, well that brings us to our next question. Why didn't the Death Star just blow up Yavin to get to its moon? The super laser was one of the final components installed in the planet killer. Thanks to Galen Erso's absence from the project, it took years to complete. It had the power to destroy planets, but it wasn't perfectly efficient. The first Death Star's super laser took 24 hours to charge. Destroying Yavin to get to Yavin 4 would have meant an entire day's wait. It made more sense to simply wait the half hour to orbit the planet and destroy the moon. I also wonder what would have happened if the Death Star fired on a gas giant. We've only ever seen it blow up terrestrial planets, but a gas giant may have had unpredictable, potentially even more disastrous results. I think Tarkin thought it was safer to just wait.
You sure you can handle this ship?
Sir, Luke is the best bush pilot in the Outer Rim territories.
How did Luke know how to fly an X-Wing in the Battle of Yavin? As Biggs Darklighter claims, Luke was one of the best bush pilots in the Outer Rim. Even though he'd never left the planet until the events of the movie, Luke would pilot his Incom T-16 Skyhopper around the desert, flying through Beggar's Canyon and bullseyeing womp rats. You can see the airspeeder earlier in the film in the background of the Lars garage, and it just so happens that the Incom Corporation also made the X-Wing starfighter flown by the rebels in the Battle of Yavin. The controls to the X-Wing and the Skyhopper were known to be very similar, which gave Luke a head start in learning the new ship.
Lock air spoils in attack position.
Why are X-Wings and Y-Wings named after our alphabet? Most writing we see in Star Wars uses the Arabesh alphabet, and the letter Zesh does not look like an X. While Arabesh was the most common alphabet used in the galaxy far, far away, it wasn't the only alphabet. High Galactic was another form of writing that was an exact match for the English or Latin alphabets we use in the real world. So I suppose the manufacturers of X and Y-Wings decided to name their ships after the High Galactic letters they resembled. Why were U-Wings not used in the Battle of Yavin? We know the Rebel Alliance had them on Yavin 4 thanks to Rogue One, so why not send them to attack the Death Star? There are a couple of reasons for this. First, most of the Rebellion's U-Wings were destroyed during the Battle of Scarif. They were part of Blue Squadron, which was sent to the planet's surface during that battle. Most, if not all, of their ships were destroyed, and they suffered the loss of their flight leader, General Merrick. Even if some U-Wings had survived the battle, they would not have made sense to use to attack the Death Star. U-Wings were primarily transport ships, delivering troops into combat zones. If part of the Battle of Yavin involved dropping soldiers onto the Death Star itself, then maybe they would have been useful. The game Star Wars Squadrons does show the ship offering support and resupply to fellow starfighters as well, but I imagine that if any U-Wings had been available, they would have been deemed impractical for the Battle of Yavin.
This is Gold Leader. We're starting our attack run.
Where is the Death Star Trench? It's a common misconception that Rebel starfighters flew through the large equatorial trench that houses the space station's docking bays, but the trench leading to the thermal exhaust port is actually closer to the top of the Death Star. According to the book The Making of Star Wars, it was one of 18 trenches that started about halfway up from the equator and traveled 40 miles to the North Pole of the superweapon. What rebels survived the Battle of Yavin besides Luke Skywalker and Wedge Antilles? We can see a lone Y-Wing flying away from the Death Star alongside the Millennium Falcon and 2 X-Wings, so who was piloting that ship? Her name was Yvonne Verlaine. She was an Alderaanian who went on to help Leia rescue other refugees from her homeworld immediately after the destruction of the Death Star. She served as a leader for those survivors until they could find a new home, but she remained a part of the rebellion, joining Starlight Squadron shortly after the Battle of Hoth. She survived the Galactic Civil War and became a part of the New Republic Defense Fleet. In Star Wars Legends, we have a different answer to the question. Back then, the pilot's name was Kian Farlander, who was created for the X-Wing video game. He also survived the Galactic Civil War and became a Jedi Knight after learning of his Force sensitivity. Why didn't Chewbacca get a medal for his participation in the Battle of Yavin? Actually, he did. The books Smuggler's Run and The Princess, the Scoundrel, and the Farm Boy, as well as other stories, confirm that Chewbacca was given a medal. We can see the medal itself in the Chewbacca comic, so why didn't we see him receive it in the movie? The real answer is that the story is not about Chewbacca. Luke and Han go through character arcs learning to grow up and be less selfish. The medals are symbols of their growth first and foremost. But even back in 1977, George Lucas realized his oversight in not giving Chewbacca a medal as well. In an interview, he offered up a different possibility, saying Chewbacca wasn't given a medal because medals don't really mean much to Wookiees. They don't really put too much credence in them. They have different kinds of ceremonies. The Wookiee Chewbacca was in fact given a great prize and honor during a ceremony with his own people. The whole contingent from the Rebel Alliance went to Chewbacca's people and participated in a very large celebration. It was an honor for the entire Wookiee race. But despite that given answer, the old Legends Marvel comics would also show Chewie being given a medal of his own in a more private ceremony. So the short answer to the question is that Chewbacca got a medal, we just didn't see it happen in the movie. Okay, but here's a related question. Why didn't Wedge Antilles get a medal? He was more involved in the Battle of Yavin than Han was. I think the real reason is because, again, the movie isn't about Wedge. Some members of the audience probably would have been confused, wondering who the extra pilot was up on the stairs, especially when he was played by 2 separate actors and spent most of his screen time under a helmet. In-universe, maybe Wedge turned the honor down, feeling some level of survivor's guilt, or it's possible he was given a different medal earlier in the ceremony. After all, he was part of the Rebel Alliance already, whereas Luke, Han, and Chewbacca were not. Perhaps they were awarded with the Medal of Bravery simply because they helped destroy the Death Star despite having no obligation to. Other than the moral obligation, I should say. What do BBY and ABY mean in Star Wars? Those letters stand for before the Battle of Yavin and after the Battle of Yavin, respectively. That dating system has become the standard for Star Wars. It was largely used by fans at first, just as a simple way to say whether or not events happened before or after the events of A New Hope. It's most often used in reference books, but it has appeared in actual Star Wars stories as well, like the very first episode of Andor Season 1. Now, let's move on to The Empire Strikes Back.
Well, the bounty hunter we ran into when Lord Mendel changed my mind.
Who was the bounty hunter on Ord Mantell that made Han Solo want to leave the rebellion? We actually haven't seen the full version of that story in canon, but in 1981, a comic appropriately titled The Bounty Hunter of Ord Mantell told the legend's tale of Skor. Sometime after the events of A New Hope, he was able to kidnap Luke and Leia, hoping to lure Han into a trap so he could collect on Jabba's bounty. Of course the plan failed, the rebels escaped, and Skor was arrested by the Empire and sent to the spice mines of Kessel. He escaped months later and attempted to capture or kill Solo on Ord Mantell a second time. They struggled over Han's blaster, which went off and killed Skor. That comic isn't strictly canon, but a character resembling Skor appeared in 2 episodes of Forces of Destiny that took place on Ord Mantell, and The Empire Strikes Back from a certain point of view mentioned the character in the story The Wills Strike Back.
It's metal.
Then it couldn't be one of those creatures.
Why is Echo Base such a mess in some scenes? You can see trash lying around and medical droids tending to injured or dead Tauntauns. The Empire Strikes Back was originally going to have a sequence where Wampas attacked the rebels of Echo Base. The creatures would have run amok until being trapped in a room that snowtroopers would eventually open, only to be attacked themselves. Although several of the scenes were filmed, the ice monsters never looked quite right, and so the Wampas were mostly cut from the film, but you can still see evidence of their destruction, like the medical droid or the warning sticker on the door that contained them. Despite those scenes being deleted, they have been referenced in several Star Wars stories since, like Shadows of the Empire, Forces of Destiny, From a Certain Point of View, and more.
Then I'll see you in hell!
Does hell exist in Star Wars? Han Solo rudely tells a fellow rebel, Tigran Jamiro, that he'll see him in hell before heading out into a blizzard, so that would suggest there must be a hell or some similar realm in the galaxy far, far away. The novelization for A New Hope makes reference to Chaos, which is another word for Tartarus, the Greek mythological version of hell, as well as the deity of the same name. In Star Wars, Chaos is also known as the Void, or Hell in Corellian mythology. It would appear that different cultures had different interpretations of the realm, but none of them seemed pleasant. Some followers of the Force believed the Void was inhabited by the spirits of dead Sith and other dark side users. How did the Wampa hang Luke upside down? I don't know why I get this question so often, but I do. I'm positive this is one of those pulpy Star Wars things you're not really supposed to think about. Luke hanging upside down puts him in extra peril and gives him a chance to show off his new telekinesis skills. But it is funny to imagine the Wampa holding Luke up to the ceiling by his legs, waiting for them to freeze. I imagine the creature had to slobber all over Luke's boots and then stick him up there. In Hoth's temperatures, it probably didn't take long at all. Also, Wampas are semi-sentient, so it's not unreasonable to think they would have figured out how to keep their meat trapped and fresh, as if it were hanging up in a meat locker. When did Luke Skywalker learn to use telekinesis through the Force? The book Heir to the Jedi takes place shortly after the events of A New Hope and shows us the first time he used the Force in that way. Without Obi-Wan to guide him, Luke largely had to train on his own. On a mission with a rebel named Nakari Kellen, she was fascinated with Luke's powers and encouraged him to attempt to move a noodle while they ate together. He was successful, and although it was a small victory, it was proof of Luke's growth in the Force. Other books, like The Weapon of a Jedi, went on to continue the story of his solitary training without a master. Why did Obi-Wan wait 3 years to tell Luke to go to Dagobah? I don't think we have an official answer for this, but there is an important factor we need to take into account. Primarily, when the movie was made, the 3-year time jump hadn't been established. The story needed to get Luke to Dagobah, and so Obi-Wan's Force Ghost gave him a little nudge. But in-universe, I think we can rationalize this a couple of ways. It's possible Luke simply wasn't ready to see Kenobi, the same way Ben wasn't ready to see Qui-Gon in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. Or Luke's near-death experience could have opened the door for Deus Ex Machina Kenobi to show up and offer him some guidance. We also have to consider that Force Ghosts exist outside of space and time, as illustrated in the From a Certain Point of View book for A New Hope. This starts to get into headache and nosebleed territory the more you think about it, but the fact of the matter is, Obi-Wan's spirit knows when he will visit Luke again as soon as he dies, so he knows when the right times to appear are. Basically, we can just chalk it all up to the Cosmic Force knowing what's best, and as part of the Cosmic Force, Obi-Wan aligns himself with its timeline.
There you will learn from Yoda.
Why did Obi-Wan call Yoda the Jedi Master who trained him? Did he forget about Qui-Gon Jinn? No, of course not. Obviously, at the time of making The Empire Strikes Back, I think Yoda was meant to be Obi-Wan's master. The character of Qui-Gon Jinn hadn't been created yet. But now that we know the full story of the prequels and the fact that Obi-Wan was Qui-Gon's Padawan, we also know that Yoda had a passion for teaching younglings, so he had a hand in every Jedi's training. Not to mention, it would have been odd for Obi-Wan to tell Luke to go to Dagobah to find the Jedi Master that trained him when he was a kid, and oh man, I wish my real master were still alive, but oh well, beggars can't be choosers, Luke.
He looks strong enough to pull the ears off a Gundar.
Han Solo tells Luke he looks strong enough to pull the ears off of a Gundark after recovering from the Wampa attack. So what is a Gundark? They were large, ferocious creatures from the planet Vancor. They had 4 arms, massive claws, and a mouth full of sharp teeth. They were formidable opponents, so telling someone they were strong enough to pull the prominent ears off of one would be an impressive feat. They first appeared in the Clone Wars episode Dooku Captured, where they were seen to be trouble for even Obi-Wan and Anakin. R2-D2, however, handled them fairly well in the episode R2 Come Home.
Set your course for the Hoth system.
How did Vader get command of the Imperial fleet? In A New Hope, Vader was basically the Emperor's attack dog and existed outside of the Imperial military, but in The Empire Strikes Back, he leads the entire Starfleet. How did that happen? As the sole survivor of the Battle of Yavin, Emperor Palpatine placed much of the blame for the loss of the Death Star on his apprentice. He also challenged Vader with several rivals that could potentially take his place. For the following months, the Sith Lord removed his enemies one by one until none were left standing. He also worked with the rogue archaeologist Dr. Aphra to create a personal droid army he could use to overthrow the Emperor. Although that plan fell apart, Palpatine was pleased to see his apprentice following in the footsteps of the Sith of old. Reaffirmed of Vader's dedication to the dark side, Sidious gave him command of the Imperial fleet. When was the Super Star Destroyer Executor constructed? It was completed at Kuat shipyards shortly after the Battle of Yavin. It was originally meant to be the flagship of General Tagg, who had survived the destruction of the Death Star after investigating the supposed rebel base on Dantooine. But an Imperial doctor named Silo attempted a coup against the Emperor by stealing the massive ship. He was stopped by Darth Vader, and the Sith Lord's success prompted the Emperor to entrust the Executor to his apprentice. Vader force-choked General Tagg shortly after. What is Darth Vader's pod on the Executor? It was a meditation chamber that doubled as a life support system. When closed, it was pressurized and pumped with oxygen that allowed Vader to safely remove his helmet and suit. In the films, we only see it on the Super Star Destroyer, but it was originally planned to be included on the second Death Star in Return of the Jedi in a sequence that was removed from the final cut. In the book Tarkin, we also see it moved to Grand Moff Tarkin's ship, the Carrion Spike, so it was able to be moved around to wherever Vader required it.
The fleet has moved out to flight speed and we're preparing to...
From how far away can you choke someone? Is there a limit to the distance? In theory, I don't think so. It's similar to Luke thinking lifting an X-Wing is different from lifting a rock. It's only different in his mind. We see Vader force choke Ozzel over a Zoom call, which could have been miles away on the Executor. We've also seen Darth Sidious force choke Count Dooku over a hologram from a completely different planet. I think a Sith Lord being able to see their target, even over a hologram, helps significantly, but at the end of the day, it's just like any other power in the Force. Get over the mental hurdles that tell you something is impossible. Visualize your goal and believe it can be done. I gotta say, it feels weird to give a motivational talk about force choking someone, so I'm gonna move on.
You have failed me for the last time, Admiral.
What exactly did Admiral Ozzel mess up so badly, and why was his failure so big that it warranted death in Vader's eyes? Darth Vader specifically says, Admiral Ozzel came out of lightspeed too close to the system. This is related to an earlier line delivered by General Riken. With all the meteor activity in this system, it's going to be difficult to spot approaching ships. Basically, if Ozzel had taken the fleet out of hyperspace farther away from Hoth, they could have drifted in undetected and bombarded the rebel base before they had a chance to raise their planetary shields. But since Ozzel instead came out of hyperspace close to Hoth, the energy surge of several ships exiting hyperspace at once was picked up by rebel sensors, and they got their shield generator online. Was Admiral Ozzel secretly a rebel agent? That's a fan theory I've seen a handful of times, basically suggesting that his incompetence was all a ruse to help protect the rebel base. He first attempts to discourage Vader from looking into what the probe droid found on Hoth, and later comes out of hyperspace too close to the planet, alerting the rebels to the presence of the Imperial fleet. Did he nobly sacrifice himself to give the rebels a fighting chance? No, there's nothing to suggest that. Kindle Ozzel had a story in The Empire Strikes Back from a certain point of view where author Charles Yu writes about the Admiral's final thoughts. He actually brings up whispers he had heard among his fellow Imperials that he might be a rebel sympathizer, but the story makes it clear that Ozzel had chosen to side with the Empire and was loyal to them. He was simply as clumsy as he was stupid.
Understood? Yeah. Good luck.
What is Leia's military rank in The Empire Strikes Back? By that point, she was a general in the Rebel Alliance. The Star Wars comics set in between episodes 4 and 5 show us the deaths of several of the Rebel leaders seen in A New Hope, like Generals Dodonna and Willard. After Luke, Han, and Leia narrowly escape a massive Imperial attack, Mon Mothma contacts them to inform them of their promotions. Luke is given the rank of Commander, Han becomes a Colonel, and Leia is promoted to the rank of General at the age of 20. So by the time of the Battle of Hoth, she may have been promoted further to Grand General or something, but I think it's likely she is still the same rank.
Good. Our first catch of the day.
Why didn't the rebels fly away from Hoth in the opposite direction of the Imperial fleet? I would say it's possible that the Empire had the planet entirely surrounded, leaving the rebels with no good options for escape, but it does look like the Empire is basically just on one side of Hoth, so why are the rebels flying directly into them? When trying to prevent escape, the Empire would need to focus on blocking the known hyperspace lanes going in and out of any given system. Those are the safest ways to travel because they are known to be free of obstructions. Hyperspace is dangerous to just jump into at random. In theory, the rebels could have fled into hyperspace in any direction away from Hoth, but I think they would have considered that to be even more dangerous than attempting to break through the Imperial fleet to use a known hyperspace lane.
Rogue Group, use your harpoons and tow cable.
When was Rogue Squadron created? About 1 year after the Battle of Yavin. During his adventures with the Rebellion, Luke traveled to the Ashes of Jeddah, where he learned about Jyn Erso and the other heroes of Rogue One, who all perished to steal the plans to the Death Star. He learned of all the sacrifices that had to be made that allowed him to take that impossible shot. Months later, the entire Rebel fleet gathered in secret at the Mako-Ta shipyards. Their location was given to the Empire by a traitor, and Luke led a desperate and improvised squadron to buy their allies time to escape. Inspired by the members of Rogue One, he quickly named the new group of pilots Rogue Squadron, and they saved as many lives as they possibly could. Luke's actions that day helped him earn the rank of Commander. How are AT-ATs deployed onto Hoth? The Empire had several options to take their various walkers from space to a planetary surface. Solo: A Star Wars Story introduced us to the AT Hauler, which delivered an AT-DT to the Battle of Mimban, but I imagine an all-terrain armored walker would have been too large for those to handle. Star Wars Rebels and Battlefront 2 have actually shown AT-ATs being delivered to the surface of Lothal and Naboo by Gazanti-class assault carriers. Those versatile ships were used for all kinds of jobs throughout the Empire. Star Wars Legends also established the Theta-class AT-AT barge, which could carry 2 walkers into battle. But the simple answer is that the Empire used dropships to deliver their massive machines of war onto the battlefield.
The shield will be down in moments.
What happened to General Veers after the Battle of Hoth? The script and novelization for the film included a scene where a snowspeeder crashed into the general's AT-AT, killing him. That was removed from the film, but was written into The Empire Strikes Back from a certain point of view story, The Truest Duty. However, in that story, Veers is pulled to safety by one of his loyal pilots, TK-7834, whose name was Lastok. That character is named for the man who runs the Twitter account Veerswatch, who catalogs every appearance of his favorite character, General Maximilian Veers. Which is just one of the best things ever. A person keeping love for a very specific character alive gets to be the namesake of the character who literally saves him in universe. That's perfect. We don't know what happened to General Veers after Hoth. Despite his near death back in episode 5, Julian Glover was invited back to have Veers leading the Battle of Endor, but was unable to fit Return of the Jedi into his schedule. In Star Wars Legends, he was seen perishing in the comic Dark Empire 2, 7 years after the Battle of Hoth.
R2!
Did Yoda forget R2-D2? Of course, at the time of the creation of The Empire Strikes Back, there would have been no reason for the two characters to know one another, but now we know they shared quite an adventure together at the end of the Clone Wars, traveling to Dagobah and the Wellspring of Life. Yoda's story by Jim Zub in The Empire Strikes Back from a certain point of view makes it clear that Yoda recognized R2-D2. He didn't even seem surprised at the cycle of fate that would have brought Anakin's droid to Luke's side. I think this moment is a lot like Obi-Wan's interactions with R2 in A New Hope. Yes, they knew one another, but when Obi-Wan or Yoda didn't divulge that knowledge right away, R2-D2 seemed content to play along. Maybe the droid even thought it was funny. At least up until Yoda started whacking him with his cane, he probably wasn't crazy about that.
This ground sure feels strange.
How can everyone walk around inside the space slug without spacesuits? According to sources like The Empire Strikes Back from a certain point of view, space slugs, or exogorths if you want to be technical, could live for billions of years. During that time, they grew to be so large that they contained entire ecosystems inside of them. I suppose that produced some sort of basic atmosphere as well. But the behind-the-scenes answer from the making of the film is that Star Wars isn't concerned with realism in space. In the Star Wars Archives book, George Lucas is quoted saying, "In my world, there is air in outer space, when I want it." Director of The Empire Strikes Back, Irvin Kershner, has a similar quote in a 1979 interview. I'm paraphrasing a bit, but he said, "I consider Star Wars a fairy tale. In science fiction, you're very concerned about leaving a spaceship on a planet because there may not be oxygen, so you must take all that into consideration or it's considered very poor science fiction. Star Wars is a fairy tale. That's the context that you can literally do anything, and if I believe it while I'm doing it, the audience tends to believe it too."
A domain of evil it is.
What exactly is the Dark Side Cave on Dagobah? It was a vergence in the Force, a place of powerful dark side energies. According to The Empire Strikes Back, from a certain point of view, it was thousands of years old and had seen countless Force users come and go. The vergence fed off of the people who entered it until it started to have an awareness of its own, learning how to twist their thoughts, memories, and fears to sate its hunger. Qui-Gon Jinn was the first presence the cave ever felt twice, and then Yoda became the only living being to return to Dagobah after experiencing its visions. And Yoda visited the Cave of Evil several times during his stay there, continuing to confront and conquer his fears. Star Wars Legends offered a different origin story in which a Jedi named Minch, who was the same species as Yoda, killed a Darkside user on Dagobah, and his Force energy infested the area, creating the Darkside Cave. What does Luke's vision in the Darkside Cave mean? This is something that can be up for debate, as I think it has many interpretations, but I'll give my take on the scene. Luke beheads Darth Vader, and the mask explodes open to reveal that it's Luke's face inside. This could be considered foreshadowing to Luke's familial connection with Vader and the fact that he is the son of one of the most feared and evil men in the galaxy, but even if that weren't the case, I think it's a symbol for the darkness within us all. Earlier, Luke told Yoda he wasn't afraid to begin his training as a Jedi, and Yoda told him he would be. One of the major themes of Star Wars is about the power that each of us have and what we choose to do with that power. Will we use our gifts and talents to help others or for selfish reasons? We all have the potential for both. As Luke grows in his own power as a Jedi, hoping to become a hero, he sees that he could just as easily become a villain. How did Boba Fett know where Han was hiding on the Star Destroyer? He's just a good, intuitive bounty hunter. He put himself in Solo's shoes, and while the other bounty hunters left the Imperial fleet to go on the hunt, he stayed behind and found the Millennium Falcon attached to the Star Destroyer Avenger. Then, like Han Solo, Fett used his own knowledge of Imperial protocols to his advantage. He faked a coolant leak to gain permission to land on the Avenger. The leak made a mess on the hangar deck, and he pretended he wasn't on board. Imperial protocol demanded the hangar be cleared before a hyperspace jump, and with no other option, the deck crew moved the Slave One to waste disposal, and there Boba Fett waited to be jettisoned to follow his quarry.
Han? Leia!
How long did Luke train with Yoda on Dagobah? We only get 3 scenes of Luke actually training, and it seems like the entire movie takes place over the course of only a few days. Dagobah, Mortis, Octo, and other locations that are very strong in the Force have been confirmed by reference materials to have their own time. In the Clone Wars, Anakin and his friends go on an entire adventure in Mortis that lasts 3 episodes, but when they return to their own realm, a matter of seconds have gone by. Luke probably experienced a similar passage of time on Dagobah. We also don't know exactly how long it took Han and Leia to reach Cloud City traveling at sublight speeds. It seems fast in the movie, but the trip could have taken a week or maybe several. The overall timeline of The Empire Strikes Back is a little hard to piece together. A historian from a certain point of view tells us that the Rebel fleet waited at the rendezvous point for at least 6 days, but that's all we can say for sure. Even though we don't have a solid answer, I think Luke was easily there for longer than it seems in the movie, getting a masterclass from one of the greatest Jedi of all time, and we, the audience, only saw his 3 most important lessons in the movie. The closest thing we have to an official answer is from Legends and the West End Games Writer's Guide, which guessed Luke experienced 6 months' worth of training. What is Cloud City? Han says it's a Tabana gas mine, but what is that, and what is Tabana gas? The city floated in orbit above the planet Bespin, which was a gas giant. The city was constructed to harvest Tabana gas from the atmosphere, where it was processed and frozen in carbonite. Tabana had many uses throughout the galaxy. It could be used as fuel or as a coolant, or it could help power hyperdrives, turbo lasers, and repulsor lifts. Some alien species, like the Mukalaran, even breathed Tabana, so it was a highly sought-after resource. What's more is Cloud City was small enough to fall outside of the notice of the Empire or the Mining Guild, which was also under the umbrella of the Empire. Of course, the events of Episode 5 changed all that.
Ichuta. How rude.
What does Ichuta mean? Unfortunately, we don't have an answer to that. There may have been a decision to never translate it and just leave the amount of rudeness up to the audience's imagination, which I think is funny. The book How Not to Get Eaten by Ewoks and Other Galactic Survival Skills says that Achuta is a friendly Huttese greeting, but Ichuta means something impossibly rude. Ben Burt, who created the phrase, said it wasn't appropriate to translate in his Legends Galactic Phrasebook and Travel Guide. And the young reader adaptation of The Empire Strikes Back, called So You Want to Be a Jedi, says it is absolutely not appropriate to translate, maybe when you're older. Ichuta has popped up in several Star Wars stories, and I don't think we'll ever find out what it really means, but I think F you or F off or maybe even something worse makes sense. Pick your favorite 4-letter word and go with that. Why doesn't Lobot talk? What is his deal? He actually used to talk, as we can see in the excellent Lando comic by Charles Soule. In that story, we learn that he was given the cybernetic implants by the Empire to analyze battle statistics, but he got away from the Empire and became close friends with Lando Calrissian. Lobot was able to mentally fight the implants from completely taking over his personality until one fateful job. They were hired to steal some artifacts from a ship, which turned out to belong to none other than Emperor Palpatine. Lobot was injured by a royal guard during the mission, and later the ship was set to self-destruct. To save his friends, Lobot had to allow the implants to take over his mind, so they could activate the escape pods at the expense of his personality. Lando continued to keep Lobot by his side as he searched for a cure, but the reason for Lobot's silence in the movie is that he sacrificed what made him who he was to save his friend.
There is another.
Who was the other Yoda spoke of? Did George Lucas always intend for it to be Leia? The short answer is no, he didn't, at least not during the creation of The Empire Strikes Back, or else he probably wouldn't have had them kiss. The longer answer is that, according to the making of Star Wars, George did have the idea to make Luke and Leia twins as far back as 1975. He decided not to go that direction in A New Hope and stuck with the Luke, Han, Leia love triangle in The Empire Strikes Back, but Yoda's line, "There is another," was still meant to foreshadow Luke meeting his sister in future movies. Producer Gary Kurtz claimed it would have happened in Episode 8. The plan was for her to be a completely new character, basically being trained as a Jedi on the other side of the universe, so she and Luke would be two individual heroes ready to rise up against the Empire. But when Return of the Jedi rolled around and Lucas decided he would only finish this trilogy and then the prequels, he decided to combine the sister character with Leia. A decision he admitted in the making of Return of the Jedi was a real challenge to make sincere and believable. Is that IG-88 in Cloud City? In Star Wars Legends, the answer is definitely yes. The book Tales of the Bounty Hunters said that 5 models of IG-88 were activated, and IG-88B had a run-in with Boba Fett on Cloud City during the hunt for the Millennium Falcon. He was defeated and left for scrap, as we can see in the movie. Technically, there is a canon reference book that mentions this story, but that specific book, Ultimate Star Wars, has several errors in it. The War of the Bounty Hunters comics show IG-88 confronting and being defeated by Boba Fett on Tatooine, not Cloud City, so I would consider that the canon version of the story. The droid remains in Cloud City are likely just another random IG model, the same way there are also the remains of an LOM series protocol droid that isn't for LOM. That said, this is just my own opinion and preference. There could absolutely be an argument for IG-88 losing a fight on Cloud City and then being reactivated to face him again on Tatooine, or that could be another IG-88 copy or something.
We would be honored if you would join us.
How did the Empire beat the Millennium Falcon to Cloud City? A bounty hunter as skilled as Boba Fett would have been able to deduce exactly where Han would have headed after the asteroid field. They had limited range thanks to their broken hyperdrive, and surely Fett would have known that Lando Calrissian was an ally to the scoundrel. He definitely knew of their history in Star Wars Legends. Once he figured out Cloud City was their destination, he contacted the Empire, and they were able to jump ahead to Bespin through hyperspace while the Falcon limped along at sublight speeds. That gave Darth Vader plenty of time to be extra dramatic, setting up a little dinner party and everything. Speaking of that dinner, did Darth Vader actually have dinner with everyone on Cloud City? Obviously, since the scene isn't shown, everything is left up to the audience's interpretation, but I personally think that it's likely a meal was at least served. According to the annotated screenplay of The Empire Strikes Back, the story treatment did feature a scene where the whole group sat down to eat, but Lando was the only one with an appetite. During the meal, Vader would have divulged his whole plan to use Han and Leia as bait for Luke, but it was decided that leaving the scene up to the imagination behind closed doors made Vader and the scene more menacing. I will also point out that there is a story in The Empire Strikes Back from a certain point of view all about the chef that prepared the food for that meal, but it ends before we get to see if it's ever served or if anyone takes a bite. And I would also regret not including Robot Chicken's version of the scene as well.
We only use this facility for carbon freezing. You put him in there, it might kill him.
Shouldn't Darth Vader know carbon freezing wasn't lethal? In the Clone Wars, we see Anakin Skywalker, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Ahsoka Tano, and several clones freeze themselves in carbonite to smuggle themselves past sensor scans to infiltrate a separatist prison, and nobody dies. In The Empire Strikes Back, Vader is not the one to bring up any concerns about the process, instead it's Lando. Vader simply admits that the carbon freezing facility is crude. Cloud City, hovering in the Outer Rim above Bespin, likely had far worse equipment than the Galactic Republic would have on Coruscant. So Darth Vader knew a person could survive being frozen in carbonite as long as the machinery was in working order. That's why they tested the process on Han Solo first, to make sure it wouldn't be malfunctioning in any way. Why did Darth Vader stop Boba Fett from shooting Chewbacca? There are a few potential answers for this. First, his entire goal in that scene is to test the carbon freezing chamber on a living person. If Boba Fett starts blasting, a stray bolt could hit Han or Leia or damage the machinery. Not to mention, if all of his captives were dead, Luke would have no reason to fall into Vader's trap. There was no practical reason to let things escalate, especially with Boba Fett around, who the film earlier establishes as a bit of a loose cannon. Vader is luring Luke to Cloud City by causing pain in his friends, and Chewbacca's pain at losing Han would be immense. The Darth Vader comics by Greg Pak also show that Vader wanted to continue dangling a thread of hope in front of Luke. He wanted Luke to believe he and their friends continued to survive because of the strength of their bond, when in reality, at least in Vader's eyes, he was manipulating them all the time. So basically, killing Chewbacca was not a part of Vader's vision for this trap, so he stopped Boba Fett from opening fire. What is in Willrow's Hood ice cream maker? I mean, his Camptono. We don't currently know exactly, but we do know it was something valuable. It's kind of like how we don't know what's in the briefcase in Pulp Fiction. The From a Certain Point of View story Due on Batuu gives us some of the details. Hoping to one day become his own boss, Willrow was interested in becoming a smuggler, so he got a job from a friend of his in the business named Farron. He was given a 10,000 credit advance to deliver whatever was in the Camptono to someone on Batuu in 10 days. If he pulled it off, he would receive 40,000 additional credits. His escape happened to coincide with the evacuation of Cloud City, and as he fled, he bumped into Farron, who attempted to take the Camptono back, and in their struggle, they broke whatever was inside. Farron abandoned the item, and Willrow escaped the city with a pilot friend, deciding to go anywhere in the galaxy except for Batuu.
I am your father.
Did George Lucas always know Darth Vader was going to be Luke's father? Lucas himself has told contradictory stories about this, but I think the likeliest answer is no, especially when you look at the development of A New Hope. The second and third drafts of the film included death scenes for Vader. The third draft included memories Luke had of his father before he died. Recordings from 1975 suggest that there is more to Vader's identity, but also talk about showing the battle in which Luke's father is killed in the prequels. The making of The Empire Strikes Back talks about a meeting where the identity of Luke's father was discussed and changed as the story developed. Story ideas as late as 1978 thought to bring in Anakin's Force Ghost alongside Obi-Wan's to reveal that Luke had a sister. It appears that the second draft of the script, written in that same year, was the first time Lucas had settled on Darth Vader and Anakin Skywalker being the same character. Why did Darth Vader let Admiral Piet live at the end of The Empire Strikes Back? He had no problem killing off Admiral Ozzel or Captain Needa, so why was Piet spared? The character wasn't originally meant to appear in Return of the Jedi, but according to actor Kenneth Cawley, fan mail supporting his return convinced George Lucas to bring him back. I imagine Piet likely was going to be presumed dead and killed off-screen in between episodes 5 and 6, but since he was brought back for Return of the Jedi, why did Vader let him live? The Darth Vader comics by Greg Pak basically show the immediate aftermath of The Empire Strikes Back, and the Sith Lord seems to be completely preoccupied with thoughts of his past, which came back to the surface after revealing his identity to Luke. He directed his rage at the Emperor, Obi-Wan, the Lars family, and everyone else who kept his son's existence a secret, leaving immediately on a new mission. Piet was just an insignificant footnote for Vader on that day, which was lucky for him. What did the rest of the rebellion do while Luke and the others were gone? Wedge's story in The Empire Strikes Back from a certain point of view tells us that the fleet waited for Luke and Leia for at least 6 days. They had no idea where either had run off to, if they had been captured, or worse, killed. But they refused to give up hope. A nearby pirate group began ambushing rebel supply ships, and it became a growing concern that the pirates would discover and sell the fleet's location. Wedge Antilles was promoted to flight commander in Luke's stead, and he quickly assembled and trained a new squadron to destroy the pirates and keep their location a secret so they could continue to wait for Luke and Leia's return. Those events took 6 days. We don't know how long the fleet waited beyond that time. Why is Lando wearing Han's clothes as he leaves the rebel fleet? Lando fled Cloud City in a hurry with only the cape on his back. Oh no, he didn't even have a cape. Poor guy. Anyway, Han Solo made a ton of changes to the Millennium Falcon when he won it from Lando years earlier, and I'm sure the cape closet was first to go. In its place were probably just rows and rows of shirts and black vests, so that's what Lando had to work with. The Star Wars comics show that he wasted no time finding some more stylish clothing to fit with his sense of fashion. Behind the scenes, Harrison Ford was unsure if he wanted to return to film a third Star Wars movie, and so the story allowed for him to be removed but not dead. There were options for the future. If Harrison decided not to return, Billy D. Williams would be available to take his place as the lovable scoundrel character. The costume could have been a way to subconsciously prepare audiences for that possibility. What is this galaxy-looking object at the end of The Empire Strikes Back? The original script and the novelization for Empire described the celestial body outside of the window as a large red star. ILM at some points called it a nebula, and you can find images of some of their attempts to create a red nebula in behind-the-scenes sources for the movie. For some reason, the nebula concept was scrapped in favor of something that resembles a galaxy, probably just because they thought it looked cool. But according to Lucasfilm Story Group members, it is a protostar, which is basically the early formation of a new star. So I would say Luke and Leia are looking at the creation of a new star system. But also, it doesn't really matter. Like I said, I'm sure the image was chosen because it looked cool and interesting first and foremost. But for now, the current and official answer is that it's a protostar and not a galaxy. Now let's move into Return of the Jedi.
I assure you, Lord Vader, my men are working as fast as they can.
How is the second Death Star built so fast? The first one took 20 years, but the second was built in only 4? The only reason it took so long to build the first Death Star was because the super laser technology hadn't been developed. Of course, constructing the battle station itself was a massive undertaking, but the Empire had the resources to do it. The book Catalyst by James Luceno goes into the difficulties met by Orson Krennic, and we see the delay caused by Galen Erso when he learned his research was being used to create a planet killer. His time in hiding stalled development, and even when he returned, it took several more years to build a functioning weapon. The second Death Star began construction almost immediately after the destruction of the first. While it certainly wasn't convenient for the Empire to build another superweapon, it still had the resources to do so, and this time it didn't have to wait for Galen Erso's research. So they were able to build an operational, albeit incomplete, Death Star in only 4 years.
I tell you, this station will be operational as planned.
How is the second Death Star different from the first? What improvements did Moff Jerjerrod make to the design? According to Jerjerrod's story in Return of the Jedi from a certain point of view, the new superweapon's design exceeded its predecessor in size, power, and efficiency. Star Wars Legends says the second Death Star was 125% larger, and its super laser was able to recharge in only 3 minutes, compared to the first iteration's 24-hour recharge time. But the most important change Jerjerrod made surrounded the thermal exhaust port for obvious reasons. Thanks to Rogue One, we know that Galen Erso built a flaw into the Death Star's main reactor. Any explosion in any of the reactor modules would set off a chain reaction that would destroy the entire superweapon, and maybe the only way for a torpedo to reach a reactor module was through the 2-meter-wide thermal exhaust port. For the second Death Star, Jerjerrod removed the single larger port and replaced it with millions of minuscule tubes that stretched from the core of the station to the surface, allowing heat to escape. He also built what he referred to as choke points and fail-safes into the system to prevent any chain reaction from reaching the main reactor. Unfortunately for him, none of that would matter if Rebel pilots could simply fly to the center of the station, but I would say the blame for that falls on the Emperor, who prioritized the Death Star's weapon systems over its infrastructure. What are the spider-like droids seen wandering around Jabba's palace? They're known as Bomar monks. They were organic beings who believed they needed to remove all physical sensations to achieve enlightenment. So they took their brains out of their bodies and placed them in jars, which were then attached to those spider droid things. Jabba's palace was originally a monastery for the Bomar order, but since they were just walking brains in jars, the building was taken over by a bandit named Alcara, who was eventually driven out by Jabba. After his death, it passed to Bib Fortuna and then Boba Fett. All of the monastery's owners felt no need to force the Bomar monks out, and they were allowed to stay. Why did Boba Fett seemingly sit around at Jabba's palace for an entire year between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi? Sure, he often worked for the Hutt, but he didn't have an exclusive contract and was in high demand as a bounty hunter. The Star Wars comics set in between episodes 5 and 6 show us the re-emergence of Crimson Dawn, a rival criminal syndicate to the Hutt clan. They had kind of a grand reopening party surrounding the theft and auction of Han Solo's carbonite slab. Orchestrated by Kira, her stunt was meant to throw the criminal underworld into chaos, and she absolutely succeeded. The Hutt Council was slaughtered, leaving Jabba as the sole survivor, and the rest of the syndicates went to war with one another. Jabba was nervous and basically hiding on Tatooine, so when Boba Fett finally recovered and delivered Han Solo, he promised the bounty hunter more credits if he stuck around. Fett correctly guessed that the Hutt wanted protection from Crimson Dawn and agreed to stay after being handed a large sum of credits. How did Leia get her bounty hunter disguise? Forces of Destiny shows Leia, Chewbacca, and R2-D2 traveling to Ord Mantell to meet with Maz Kanata, hoping she could help them free Han. There, they were attacked by the bounty hunter Bausch, who they incapacitated. Maz suggested the armor was just Leia's size and would be the perfect ruse to gain an audience with Jabba. Later, Leia donned the armor and posed as Bausch in front of the Trandoshan bounty hunter Bosk. She pretended to kill Lando Calrissian and publicly staged Chewie's capture to build up the legitimacy of her claims in Jabba's palace. Does Max Rebo have arms? I guess it depends on which action figure or Funko Pop you're looking at, or rather, whether you're talking about Star Wars canon or Legends. Legends stories and merchandise tend to show Max with 2 arms and 2 legs standing inside of his red ball organ, but the original design for Max had him sitting on a cushion playing music with his feet. That initially got lost in translation, and so Max Rebo and the rest of his species were presented with 4 limbs. More recently, it would seem that canon stories have made an effort to honor Phil Tippett's intent, giving the character 2 legs and no arms. That said, there still have been moments in canon where the 4-limbed version can be seen. Does Luke force choke the Gamorrean guards in Jabba's palace? There is evidence for both yes and no. The script for the film doesn't say anything about the guards choking, but the novelization does, saying that they clutched at their own throats, gasping and choking. The film itself shows both guards going for their throats as well, but you can find mentions of the event in books like the Thrawn Trilogy, where Luke remembers simply using a mind trick to befuddle the guards. So what's going on here? My best guess is that the original intent was for Luke to use the dark side to choke the guards. His big character arc for the movie is ultimately rejecting the dark side to become a Jedi, but at the start of the film, that's all up in the air. As the story developed and George Lucas decided to change the title from Revenge of the Jedi to Return of the Jedi, he may have dialed back some of Luke's actions. So the force chokes may have turned into some sort of mind trick, but the choking did still make it into the novelization, which included other drop details like Owen originally being Obi-Wan's brother instead of Anakin's. So I guess I would say that officially Luke does not force choke the guards, but I do kind of think that's what was filmed.
You will bring Captain Solo and the Wookiee to me.
What was the actual full plan to save Han Solo from Jabba's palace? I've been waiting for the Star Wars comics by Charles Soule to answer this more directly, but at the time of making this video, we're close, but not quite there yet. So here's my best attempt at a guess. First, the comics show us the cyborg bounty hunter Bylert Valance removed a massive battle droid from Jabba's security forces to make rescuing Han a little easier for everyone else. I think Lando was sent in undercover to do some recon. C-3PO and R2-D2 were then sent in to first give Jabba a chance to do the right thing, but also to sneak Luke's lightsaber in. Then Leia was sent in to try to covertly free Han. When that failed, Luke entered to once again try to negotiate with Jabba, and then he tried to shoot the slug in the face. I don't know if they all lucked out being executed on the sail barge where R2 happened to be stationed, or maybe some of Lando's time undercover gave them the intelligence to know the Sarlacc was Jabba's favorite form of execution. Basically, I think the plan was to give Jabba several chances to let Han go, but each of the Hutt's denials took the group one step closer to the endgame I'm sure they knew was likely. A full-on battle. How How did Luke get his green kyber crystal? The Charles Soule run of Star Wars comics is currently answering that exact question, so we don't have the full story yet, but this is what we know so far. After losing his father's lightsaber, Luke Skywalker found a replacement in the form of an old yellow Temple Guard lightsaber. It eventually became damaged and unreliable, so the young Jedi decided it was time to learn to build his own. On his quest, he met a kyber crystal expert named Dr. Kuwata, who offered Luke 2 crystals, one red and one clear. He meditated on the clear crystal, formed a bond with it, and it turned green. Although it's not yet fully confirmed, I would assume that's the crystal he uses to build his lightsaber as shown in deleted scenes for Return of the Jedi. In Star Wars Legends, Luke created his green crystal through instructions found in Obi-Wan Kenobi's hut. That story was told in Shadows of the Empire, but synthetic lightsaber crystals have been largely left out of new canon stories. Who survived the sail barge explosion? We know from the Book of Boba Fett that Bib Fortuna and Max Rebo made it out. Return of the Jedi from a certain point of view tells us Bib was thrown from the blast into the sand. He awoke to find a surviving Gamorrean guard attempting to give him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Maybe that was one of Bib's guards also seen in the Book of Boba Fett. From a certain point of view also tells us that most of the Max Rebo band made it out alive. Joe Yowza escaped on a spare sand skiff, leaving Max to die, but Max, Droopy McCool, and Cy Snoodles still made it to safety from the explosion. I would say that Salacious Crumb is also a brief survivor of the sail barge. The blast tossed him out of a window, but he landed in the Great Pit of Carkoon, so his survival was short-lived. And of course, Boba Fett made it out of the battle, but he was in the Sarlacc when the explosion happened.
Rise, my friend.
Who are the Emperor's advisors? They were bureaucratic allies of Palpatine's that held a number of responsibilities. Some were purely political and served on the Imperial Ruling Council, but some seemed fully aware of their leader's true identity as Darth Sidious. Yup Tashu from the Aftermath trilogy of books definitely knew. Minister Hyden from Star Wars Rebels probably knew as well. The 6 advisors who joined the Emperor on the second Death Star were Janis Grijatis, Sima Lu, Sate Pestage, Ars Dangor, Kryn Blista Vinay, and Pebamaris Zorn. Grijatis and Alu were known to search the galaxy for Sith artifacts, so they likely knew about Darth Sidious, like Tashu and Hyden. All 6 of the advisors on the second Death Star perished in its explosion. Yup Tashu played a major role in the Galactic Empire for the year following the Battle of Endor, helping to orchestrate the Battle of Jakku, which nearly saw the annihilation of Imperial and New Republic forces.
When 900 years old you reach, look as good you will not,
Did Yoda really teach Jedi for 800 years? This question has become more prevalent after we met Grogu, who is still a baby at the age of 50, so that timing now seems kind of strange. Does Yoda's species hit a massive growth spurt at the age of 60 or something? Maybe, we don't know how they age. Maybe their version of puberty is really intense, but they come out the other side very wise and ready to teach. But I think it's more likely that Yoda is exaggerating. I think it's reasonable that Yoda could have become a Jedi Knight by the age of 190 or maybe even earlier. Then he could have taken on a Padawan shortly after, marking his first time training a Jedi. That gives him 700 plus years of teaching. Using Han Solo's not if you round up rules, sure, Yoda taught Jedi for 800 years, give or take. Yoda probably made that number bigger every time he made that claim. First it was 500 years, then 600, no 7, no 800 years.
When gone am I, the last of the Jedi will you be?
Was Luke really the last Jedi after Yoda's death? Obviously not, since we've learned of other Jedi survivors out in the galaxy like Ahsoka Tano, Baylan Skoll, Ezra Bridger, and Cal Kestis might still be running around somewhere. So what gives, Yoda? Why are you lying to Luke like that? Well, Yoda's actual line is that Luke will be the last of the Jedi, not the last. In 1983, I absolutely think that's how the line was meant to be interpreted, but since then, things have changed. Even George Lucas had plans to bring more Jedi survivors into the story in his proposed sequel movies, but still, I think the spirit of Yoda's words rings true. First, he's simply trying to motivate Luke in his coming fight to save the galaxy. He's not trying to lore dump all over him. What's more is all those Jedi I mentioned should have an asterisk next to their names on the list of surviving Jedi. At the time of Return of the Jedi, Ahsoka didn't consider herself a Jedi, and says as much in Star Wars Rebels. Baylan Skoll had fallen to the dark side, Ezra Bridger was missing, and we don't know the full story of Cal Kestis yet. So Luke might as well have been the last Jedi. When did the Mon Calamari fleet join the rebellion? Admirals Akbar and Raddus were already part of the Rebel Alliance by the time of the battles of Scarif and Yavin, but the rest of Mon Cala and its shipyards were under Imperial rule for about another year. Luke Skywalker and his friends attempted to rescue their king, Li Char, who had been imprisoned by the Empire for nearly 2 decades. He delivered a stirring speech to his people before passing away, which rallied them to rise up against the Empire, liberating their shipyards and several complete capital ships. Shortly after, the growing rebel fleet gathered in secret at Mako Ta, but a traitor gave the Empire their location, and many of the ships were destroyed along with several members of Alliance High Command. So the fleet had to take some time to build back up once again over the course of the following 3 years until the Battle of Endor.
Someone must have told him about my little maneuver at the Battle of Tanab.
What was the Battle of Tanab? We don't have a ton of details in canon, so I'll use Star Wars Legends sources to answer this one. Shortly after the destruction of the first Death Star, Lando was in the Tanab system, which suffered from regular pirate raids. Lando happened to be delivering some cargo at the time and made a bet with some fellow freighter pilots that he could fight off the pirates. He did so by launching devices called Connor nets, which could short out ship systems when activated. Lando caught them by surprise, and the small Tanab defense force rallied behind his minor success to destroy or disable the remaining pirate fleet. He won the deed to a brewery in his bet. We don't have the full story in canon yet. Reference material still mention the same pirates, but also place the event in between the rescue of Han Solo and the Battle of Endor, which seems unlikely to me.
The Emperor's made a critical error and the time for our attack has come.
How did the Rebel Alliance find out about the second Death Star? Shortly after the events of The Empire Strikes Back, the criminal syndicate Crimson Dawn re-emerged in the galaxy with hopes of taking down Darth Sidious. Their leader and Han Solo's former lover, Kira, activated several secret Crimson Dawn agents hidden within the Galactic Empire. Their orders were simply to cause chaos. 2 of them worked on the construction of the second Death Star and fled the battle station, hoping to get word of its existence to the rebellion. They were chased across the galaxy to Coruscant, where they were rescued by none other than Luke Skywalker, who heard their distress call. They told Luke what they knew about the new superweapon, who passed the information along to Mon Mothma.
Many Bothans died to bring us this information.
What did the Bothan spies really steal? There is a major misconception that the Bothans were responsible for stealing the plans to the second Death Star, but the dialogue in Return of the Jedi specifically states the Bothans gave the rebels 4 key pieces of information: the second Death Star's exact location, its weapon systems weren't yet operational, it was relatively undefended, and the fact that the Emperor was personally overseeing its completion. Nothing about the second Death Star's plans are mentioned in the movie. However, I should point out that in Star Wars Legends, Shadows of the Empire does tell the story of Luke Skywalker, Dash Rendar, and some Bothans stealing the plans for the second Death Star together after they learn of its existence from Black Sun. And I should point out that in both continuities, the Bothans were allowed to get all of this information by the Emperor. He wanted them to know where it was and that he would be there, so the rebels would send an all-or-nothing attack where they would be trapped by heavy defenses and a fully operational battle station.
We have stolen a small Imperial shuttle.
Where did the Rebel Alliance get their stolen Imperial shuttle? Shortly before the events of Return of the Jedi, the Rebellion became increasingly worried that the Empire would discover their fleet gathering around the planet Sullust. Leia offered herself up as a distraction, a high-priority target that could keep the Empire busy chasing her instead of searching for the fleet. As seen in the book Moving Target, she and a handful of rebels bounced around the Outer Rim until they were briefly captured and taken aboard the Star Destroyer Shield Maiden, but allies of Leia's came to her aid and attacked her captors, allowing her to escape. She did so in a stolen Imperial shuttle called Tiderium. Star Wars Legends told 2 completely different versions of the shuttle's theft in 2 different X-Wing-based video games. X-Wing Alliance had a mission revolving around stealing Tiderium from Outpost 327 in the Tsar system. 1 year later, Rogue Squadron 2 Rogue Leader followed Wedge Antilles as he stole the shuttle. This was later rationalized to say that the Empire had reclaimed the shuttle, forcing the rebels to steal it a second time.
What is thy bidding, my master?
What else is in the Emperor's throne room? Located on the second Death Star's North Pole and standing at 100 stories tall, the tower was constructed to resemble Palpatine's seat of power on Coruscant, the Imperial Palace and former Jedi Temple. The spire was divided into 4 sections. One was a simple docking tube for Imperial shuttles or other smaller vessels. On the opposite side of that was a holographic map and tactical room. Opposite the throne room were Palpatine's living quarters. It was a red-colored office modeled after his offices as both Chancellor of the Republic and Leader of the Empire. Behind that were sleeping quarters that monitored Palpatine's health. Finally, the throne room itself was home to a modest chair, a massive window, and a nearby vault that housed a wayfinder used to reach the hidden Sith world Exegol.
I do believe they think I am some sort of god.
Why did the Ewoks immediately worship C-3PO in Return of the Jedi? Was it just because he was gold and shiny? Well, kind of, yeah. The Ewoks worshipped a god they called the Golden One, who was responsible for bringing light and therefore life to their moon. This was first established in the Return of the Jedi novelization, as well as canon sources like Tales from Vader's Castle and the Myths and Fables book. Return of the Jedi from a certain point of view tells us a story about Logray, the Ewok shaman, who struggled to maintain the faith of his people. After the Empire arrived and began wreaking havoc on their home, the Ewoks feared the Golden One had abandoned them, so the sudden appearance of a droid matching the description of their deity was a very welcome sight for the citizens of Bright Tree Village.
3PO, tell them they must be set free.
Where did the Ewoks get a dress for Leia? I think it makes enough sense that someone in Bright Tree Village could have sewn something together quickly. Someone has to make all their little hoods, why can't they just make a dress too? But it's also become a fan theory that the dress may have belonged to another human woman at some point. The made-for-TV Ewok movies took place 1 year before the events of Return of the Jedi and featured the Tawani family crash landing on the forest moon of Endor. They didn't stay there long before escaping or dying, but it's possible the Ewoks made a dress for Kataryn, the matriarch of the family. The Caravan of Courage and the Battle for Endor are both considered Star Wars legends now, but many elements of the movies have been brought into canon, and LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga even featured a Tawani family portrait hidden in Bright Tree Village.
She was very beautiful.
How does Leia remember her mother? At the time of writing Return of the Jedi, George Lucas had in his mind that Luke and Leia's mother was still alive after their birth. Earlier versions of the script state that Obi-Wan sent both Leia and their mother away to better hide them from the Emperor, but the mother died shortly after, and then Leia was adopted by the Organas on Alderaan. Of course, now we know that Padme died giving birth to Luke and Leia, so how do we reconcile this? I think it all comes down to the Force. Leia is strong in the Force, even if she doesn't know it. She has images and feelings not just of her mother's face, but of who she was and what she was feeling. I would say this is backed up by the memories Obi-Wan says he has of his own family, despite being taken to the Jedi Temple when he was very young.
Hey!
Is the bearded rebel at the Battle of Endor actually the clone Rex? Officially, I would say no. At a screening for the Star Wars Rebels Season 2 finale, Dave Filoni first suggested the idea that the character originally known as Nick Sant could have been Rex instead. The Star Wars Rebels series finale confirmed that Rex did fight at the Battle of Endor, but in a new interview, Filoni walked back on his speculation, saying he didn't want to explicitly replace a previously existing Star Wars character with Rex. That said, a Galaxy of Adventures short on the official Star Wars Kids YouTube channel did replace Nick Sant with Rex, complete with bits of his clone armor, so there is still kind of a link between the two characters. I think this is another case of simply choosing whatever you personally prefer. To quote Filoni one more time, he said, "I didn't want to lay it down in stone one way or the other. If that is Rex, is not Rex. For some people it's fun to believe it is Rex, and some people don't want to believe it's Rex, and I'm fine either way with that, and I think I left it in a state where you could believe one way or the other."
Red Leader standing by.
Why does Wedge Antilles report in as Red Leader instead of Rogue Leader? What happened to Rogue Squadron after The Empire Strikes Back? The answer to this is actually found in the From a Certain Point of View book for episode 5 and not 6. The short story Rendezvous shows what the Rebel fleet did while Luke and Leia were off on their own adventures. In their absence, Wedge was promoted to Flight Commander and tasked with reforming Rogue Squadron. But after losing Zev Seneska and Hobby Clivian in the Battle of Hoth, Wedge found it too painful to reuse their call signs so quickly. Instead, he decided to go back to using Red Squadron, and some of the pilots that joined the flight group, like Grizz Fricks, remained with him until the Battle of Endor. But Rogue Squadron didn't fade away. They still undertook specialized missions from General Harrison Dula after the Battle of Endor as seen in the video game Star Wars Squadrons.
Lock S-foils and attack positions.
Why don't we see B-Wings very much during the Battle of Endor? According to ILM effects artist Bill George in the book The Making of Return of the Jedi, he said the B-Wing was originally going to be featured in more shots, but its wings were too thin and would disappear against the blue screen. So basically, the ship was too thin for the limitations of visual effects in the 80s. There was no digital model of the B-Wing, it had to be created as a physical model shot on a blue screen and then composited into the final shot. Its thin frame apparently made it difficult to capture the footage needed, but you can still find some deleted footage of B-Wing pilots that was shot for the film. A Solistan pilot named Tin Num and a Mon Calamari pilot can both be found in behind-the-scenes footage. Why is the B-Wing called a B-Wing? X and Y-Wings resemble their letters, even the A-Wing is at least vaguely triangular, but the B-Wing doesn't look like a B at all. During production for Return of the Jedi, 2 new Rebel fighters were created and simply labeled A-Fighter and B-Fighter. Visual effects artist Bill George had a lot of input on the B-Fighter, and it received the nickname the Bill Wing. Star Wars Legends eventually called the ship the Blade Wing for its sword-like appearance in attack mode. The Star Wars Rebels episode Wings of the Masters brought the name into canon, so we can assume the B stands for Blade.
Strike me down with all of your hatred.
Why did Darth Vader stop Luke from killing the Emperor? Didn't he want to rule the galaxy as father and son? I think this is open to audience interpretation. Maybe Vader was saving Luke's soul, or maybe he was just that loyal to the Emperor. My guess is the latter. The Darth Vader comics by Greg Pak take place in between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi and show Vader's several attempts to defeat Darth Sidious. Of course they all fail, no matter what he tries. When he tells Luke on Endor that he doesn't know the power of the dark side and that he must obey his master, I think he truly believes that. I don't think Vader believes the Emperor can be defeated and the best outcome for him is to remain a Sith apprentice. So protecting Palpatine in that moment is like him proving his loyalty because he knows he can't beat his master in a fight. Of course, the irony is that brute strength doesn't defeat the Emperor, an act of compassion for someone else does. Why do Ewoks have a bunch of log traps constructed and ready to go? Did they build them specifically for AT-STs? No, they actually built their log traps to fight off a massive creature called the Gorax. Those huge predators were created in concept art for Return of the Jedi and were fully realized in the Ewoks' Caravan of Courage made-for-TV movie. They've since appeared in canon stories like Tales from Vader's Castle, and one episode of Forces of Destiny showed the Ewoks joining forces with Luke and Leia to defeat a Gorax with log traps not long after the Battle of Endor and the destruction of the second Death Star. So no, the traps weren't hastily built to fight the Empire, they were just conveniently already made to fight off another kind of giant.
Obi-Wan has taught you well.
Did Darth Vader or the Emperor know Luke was trained by Yoda? In the final cut of the movie, I would say the answer is unclear. Vader only ever claims that Obi-Wan taught Luke well, or that Obi-Wan's failure was complete. But jumping into the original novelization, there's a scene where the Emperor reads Luke's mind and discovers the name Yoda in his thoughts. What's interesting is that the Emperor seemed to have no clue who this Yoda person was. Of course, we now know the Sith Lord knew the Jedi Grandmaster well during the time of the Clone Wars. So Palpatine may have suspected that Yoda was still out there, and maybe he thought he helped Luke out, but there's nothing to say for sure in the movie itself. Could Darth Vader use Force Lightning? I think this is up for debate and expect exactly that to happen in the comments, but I would go with yes. Technically, he could use Force Lightning. Should he? No. That would not be a good idea for someone living in a biomechanical suit. In my opinion, he would have been able to channel lightning through his cybernetic fingers if he chose to. The Force is about belief and visualization. One of my favorite examples of this is Dagan Gera fighting with both of his hands despite only physically having one arm. He can visualize the arm he lost, so he still fights like it's there. I have no trouble believing that Darth Vader could use Force Lightning in theory. It would probably be more difficult for him to visualize and believe it could happen, and then if he did pull it off, it very well might be the last thing he ever did. In the Star Wars Legends book, Splinter of the Mind's Eye, Vader creates a ball of white energy to attack Luke. The comic adaptation of the story illustrates the energy as something that definitely appears like Force Lightning, but I don't think we will ever see Darth Vader use Force Lightning in canon. Were the blue flames seen during the Emperor's death a sign of Sith alchemy? To me, this answer is all down to headcanon. Personally, I think it was just a massive explosion of energy that looked cool and, ironically at the time, was probably meant to show how super duper definitely dead the Emperor was. See? He exploded! It's just like Darth Maul getting cut in half. Super dead guy right there. But we now know that Palpatine lived on in both canon and Star Wars Legends, so I see absolutely no harm in claiming those blue flames as foreshadowing for the return of Darth Sidious. I've never seen anything to suggest a direct connection in another book or comic or anything, but I've also never seen anything to disprove it. So if you like that idea, I say believe it all you want. What happened to the debris of the second Death Star? I think Robot Chicken really brought this question to the forefront, but it does make sense that a massive space station might rain down destruction on the Ewoks. But don't worry, most of the second Death Star was straight up vaporized. Some of the debris remained in orbit above the forest moon as seen in Battlefront 2, but any remaining wreckage that may have posed a danger to the Ewoks was intercepted. The Rebel fleet deployed shields and tractor beams to stop any debris from devastating the moon. But I guess nobody bothered to protect the ocean moon of Endor, Kef Bir, since at least one giant chunk landed there. In Star Wars Legends, Imperial remnant propaganda tried to claim the rebels simply let the remains of the Death Star fall, but it was well known to be a lie.
He's my brother.
How did Han react to learning Luke and Leia were siblings? The book The Princess and the Scoundrel by Beth Revis has a good scene of Han reflecting over the year he missed frozen in carbonite, thinking of Luke and how far he'd come from the farm boy he met on Tatooine. He recognized the jealousy he once shared of Luke and his connection with Leia. He realized how deeply their connection truly was, and then he remembered what happened between them on Hoth. Luke asks Han what he's thinking about, and he says, "Just remember that time after the Wampa attack?" The exact memory came back to Luke as well, and the two friends agreed to never speak of that moment again. Was the Battle of Endor the end of the Galactic Civil War? No, the official surrender didn't occur until 1 year later at the Battle of Jakku. However, stories like The Rise of Skywalker and Ahsoka have both talked about Endor as if it were the final battle. I would argue that the Battle of Endor was the beginning of the end for sure. I could also see the New Republic choosing to celebrate that fight over the Battle of Jakku for political propaganda. Jakku was a ruse meant to destroy both New Republic and Imperial forces in one fell swoop. It failed in that regard and ended in Imperial defeat, but it wasn't as decisive as the Battle of Endor, which saw the destruction of the second Death Star and the deaths of the Emperor and Darth Vader. I could see New Republic history books making a much bigger deal out of Endor, even if Jakku was the official final battle. What happened to Cloud City after the Battle of Endor? The end of Return of the Jedi shows a bunch of celebrating, but that didn't last long. The Imperial Governor Adelhard set up what became known as the Iron Blockade. He shut down communications in the Innuit sector that included Bespin and Cloud City, claiming that the destruction of the second Death Star and the Emperor's death were falsified rebel propaganda. Several rebel sympathizers rose up against the Empire and were aided by the return of Lando Calrissian and Lobot. The Iron Blockade was eventually broken and Cloud City was liberated less than a year after the Battle of Endor. What happened to Coruscant after the Battle of Endor? The movie shows us celebrations taking place in Monument Plaza as citizens tear down a statue of the Emperor. Stormtroopers arrived shortly after and opened fire on the crowd. Coruscant remained under Imperial control for the following year, with Mas Amedda serving as a puppet leader imprisoned in the Imperial Palace. Several young rebels were able to break Amedda out of captivity, possibly with the help of an old Coruscant diner owner named Dexter Jetster. After the Imperial defeat at the Battle of Jakku, Amedda was able to address the New Republic and offer his official surrender, bringing an end to the Galactic Civil War. Did the Ewoks eat humans? Oh, 100%. We can see they were going to cook Han Solo in honor of C-3PO. Tons of jokes have been made since then about rebels at the Ewok party wondering what they were eating, and some stories, like Alyssa Wong's Wolf Trap in Return of the Jedi from a Certain Point of View, have explicitly shown the horror of Imperials who were captured by the Ewoks and waiting to be eaten. A Forces of Destiny short also shows Leia convincing several Ewoks to not cook and eat stormtroopers, so the Ewoks definitely didn't have a problem eating humans. I doubt cooked stormtrooper was actually served at the celebration at the end of Return of the Jedi, though, despite all the jokes. I think that's an unnecessarily dark spin to put on the rebel victory. Why does Anakin Skywalker get to become a Force ghost? Revenge of the Sith and the Clone Wars made it clear that retaining your consciousness after death was only available to the light side of the Force and took specific training that Darth Vader certainly never received. Well, a major part of that training is facing and overcoming the darkest parts of yourself, something Anakin Skywalker had very recently done himself. But the story Brotherhood by Mike Chen in Return of the Jedi from a Certain Point of View goes into another part of that training, surrendering to the Force. One of Anakin's downfalls was his inability to let go of control. In his quest to stop Padme from dying, he fell to the dark side and made his visions come true. As Anakin died, he felt the urge for his spirit to remain at any cost. Once again, to control the Force, to allow him to stay so he could heal all the damage he had caused as Darth Vader. But within the Cosmic Force, Obi-Wan spoke to Anakin and convinced his friend to allow the next generation, his children, to heal the galaxy. Anakin Skywalker finally let go of his need for control. He technically did complete the training required of him, and his Force Ghost manifested alongside Obi-Wan and Yoda's. Okay, but why does Anakin's Force Ghost get to look younger than Obi-Wan's? We don't have an official answer for this, although Dave Filoni has teased that George Lucas told him the reason. I believe it was Anakin subconsciously manifesting himself in the light side. He only ever looked like Sebastian Shaw when he was Darth Vader, but Anakin Skywalker looked like Hayden Christensen. The story Brotherhood by Mike Chin in Return of the Jedi from a Certain Point of View shows that Anakin didn't choose to appear that way or to wear classic Jedi robes, it just happened. I think it's because deep down, that's how Anakin wanted to remember himself. That said, the book Shadow of the Sith has also presented Anakin's Force Ghost looking older, so that version of the character after death does still exist. I see no reason why Force Ghosts couldn't present themselves however they want, whenever they want. But for Anakin's first time, he manifested himself as the last time he saw himself as a hero. Could Sith become Force Ghosts? No, at least not in the way that we see Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Yoda at the end of Return of the Jedi. Sith are determined to collect and cling to power however they define it. Political status, wealth, strength, or whatever else they value. It's their inability to let go and surrender to the Force that prevents them from becoming a Force Ghost after death. But we have seen plenty of examples of Sith who either survived mortal wounds through sheer rage and will, like Darth Maul, or we've seen Sith who have died physical deaths, but their spirits have lingered on within their possessions, like Darth Momin continuing to inhabit his helmet and being able to influence or even take control of the people who were near it. The Sith form of life after death is limited and weak when compared to the freedom allowed by a Jedi who truly became one with the cosmic force. And okay, here's one more bonus question because it's my question. It's not frequently asked, but I need it answered. Why are there only 3 dots at the end of the crawl for Return of the Jedi? Every other Star Wars crawl has 4 dots. Why does Return of the Jedi only have 3? I'm sure it was just an oversight back in 1983, but why can't we fix it? If we can add an entire beak to the Sarlacc pit or put Hayden Christensen in the movie, surely we can add an extra dot to the crawl so it matches the other movies. I just don't get it. And that brings us to the end of the most frequently asked questions I've seen about the original Star Wars trilogy. I'm hard at work on the prequel FAQs right now. Make sure you catch those by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, following us on our socials, and please consider checking out our Patreon page for even more Star Wars talk. As always, thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.